AMP value conjecture January 2030. In January 2030, the expense of AMP is gauged to be at around a base, certainly worth of 0.18 or so. They thought the AMP and incentive in every practical sense worth can for the most part show up at a constraint of 0.21. With the run-of-the-mill trading truly worth of 0.20 in USD, which essentially is very huge AMP value figure February 2030 for February. The expense of AMP basically is expected to especially show up at a run-of-the-mill month-to-month in a real sense. The uttermost generally reaches of 0.20, while the coin will trade between a constraint of 0.21 and something like 0.20. Which is very critical AMP value expectation walk 2030. The expense of AMP is expected to explicitly reach essentially fundamentally worth of 0.20 in 2030. In an especially enormous manner, the AMP cost could show up at a generally outrageous especially worth of 0.22 with a common trading cost of 0.21 all through 2030, which for the most part is genuinely critical AMP value forecast April 2030. The expense of AMP really is expected to sort of arrive at essentially worth of 0.21 in 2030. Amazingly, the AMP cost could show up at a generally outrageous fundamentally worth of 0.23. With the regular trading cost of 0.22 all through 2030. In an unobtrusive manner AMP value estimate, May 2030. For May the expense of AMP is expected to generally show up at a normal month-to-month, outright farthest basically reaches of 0.23. While the coin will trade between a restriction of 0.24 and no less than 0.22. Sort of in opposition to prevalent thinking AMP value gauge June 2030. For June, the expense of AMP for the most part is expected to explicitly show up at a run-of-the-mill month-to-month, actually the farthest basically reaches of 0.23, while the coin will trade between a restriction of 0.25 and no less than 0.23 in a by and large huge manner AMP value conjecture July 2030. The in every practical sense ordinary expense of AMP could go to 0.24 toward July's end, which is genuinely huge. AMP could really be trading around a generally exceptionally outrageous most certainly worth of 0.27. With the base expected cost of 0.23 AMP value estimate August 2030, the especially ordinary expense of AMP could go to 0.25 toward August's end, which is very critical. AMP could in every way that really matters be trading around a biggest especially worth of 0.28. With the base expected cost of 0.24, in a kind of huge manner AMP value expectation September 2030, with respect to September 2030 AMP cost, is figure to by and large show up at a most decreased possible level of 0.25, the AMP cost could show up at a biggest possible level of 0.29, with the normal gauge cost of 0.26 AMP value expectation October 2030. The expense of AMP sort of is expected to really reach at the actual sort of the least genuinely worth of 0.26 in 2030 genuinely, as opposed to mainstream thinking the AMP cost could basically show up at a generally kind of outrageous sort of worth of 0.30, with the regular trading cost of 0.26 all through 2030. Especially in opposition to mainstream thinking AMP value gauge November 2030 and November 2030. The expense of not set in stone to be at around a base, especially worth of 0.27. In a sort of significant manner the AMP esteem truly worth can show up at a constraint of 0.31. With a run-of-the-mill trading genuinely worth of 0.28. In USD AMP value figure December 2030 and December 2030. The expense of AMP especially is assessed to by and large be at around a base exceptionally worth of 0.28. The AMP esteem extremely worth can fundamentally show up at a restriction of 0.32, with the commonplace trading kind of worth of 0.28 in USD within the latest 1 month. The expense of AMP lessened by 37,544, killing a mind-blowing essentially typical measure of 0.006 from its continuous sort of worth. This startling down suggests that the coin is in plunge at the especially present time, inferring that it will in general be a good buy and entryway for quick hypothesis, or so they most certainly thought. The 90 days cost change really is close 80-15, and the expense circumnavigated from a base ordinary expense of 0.044 to most prominent fundamentally typical expense of 0.047 in the past 90 days in every practical sense, as opposed to prevalent thinking AMP by and large, as someplace close 81-10 with the most lovely outrageous commonplace expense of the coin was around 0.055, and the base average worth of was around 0050 in past 4 months, which in every way that really matters, is very huge. AMP value conjecture 2030 facts. What will sort of be AMP especially worth in 2030 or so? They really thought the AMP cost is assessed to show up at a biggest level of 0.32, with most certainly the smallest expense of 0.28 close to the completion of 2030 in an unpretentious manner. Does AMP truly have a future to the extent that worth? AMP really has a surprising in every practical sense potential to show up at new levels, which essentially is genuinely critical. It is checked that AMP will augment in regard in spite of prevalent thinking. According to unequivocal subject matter experts and business examiners, AMP can basically rock the boat in and out of town. Cost of 0.47 till 2030. Is AMP worth buying in 2030? In a very significant manner, AMP's especially worth fundamentally, should all things considered continue to develop, as need will in exceptionally broad empower cost rise. Generously note there is a bet to any theory or so they thought just truly placed assets into what you can in a real sense accomplish before arriving at any goals, and explicitly lead the best investigation possible. AMP value estimate January 2031. For January, the expense of AMP for the most part is expected to basically show up at a run-of-the-mill month to month, all things considered. Furthest certainly reaches of 0.30, while the coin will trade between a constraint of 0.31 and no less than 0.27. In a sort of significant manner, AMP value expectation February 2031. With respect to February 2031, AMP cost in every practical sense is checked to show up at a most negligible possible level of 0.29. The AMP cost could in a real sense show up at an undoubtedly outrageous possible level of 0.32. With a run-of-the-mill guess cost of 0.31 AMP value conjecture. WAC 2031. In WAC 2031, the expense of AMP for the most part is assessed to be at around a base truly worth of 0.30. The AMP an incentive in every practical sense worth can truly show up at a restriction of 0.33, with the regular trading sort of worth of 0.31 and all things considered in opposition to prevalent thinking. AMP value figure April 2031. In April 2031, the expense of AMP most certainly is gauged to explicitly be at around a base pretty worth of 0.30. The AMP esteem essentially worth can sort of show up at a constraint of 0.35, with a run-of-the-mill trading truly worth of 0.32 in lovely, as opposed to mainstream thinking. AMP value expectation May 2031. With respect to May 2031, AMP cost fundamentally is guessed to in every practical sense show up at a most decreased possible level of 0.31. The AMP cost could especially show up at a biggest possible level of 0.36, with a normal figure cost of 0.33 or so. They most certainly thought AMP value expectation June 2031. With respect to June 2031, AMP cost generally is figured to especially show up at a most negligible possible level of 0.32 in every practical sense huge way the AMP cost could show up at a most outrageous